I love the one-two-ness of Alien and Aliens because one is one of the greatest, like, legit horror films, and the other one is, like, my favorite war movie of all time.
As a kid, I watched Aliens, I'm not joking, like 50 or 60 times.
Oh, yeah.
We had watch parties where friends of mine would get on the phone and we'd all started at the same time at our respective locations because there was no, watch party streaming and whatnot back then.
Right.
And yeah, we'd just watch the movie and listen to each other watch the movie and have fun and talk about it. Yeah, it's good stuff.
I saw Aliens first. And then I remember that I had, we rented a VHS copy of Alien. And so I was like, well, let me just get into this. I had to watch Alien over the course of like 3 or 4 days in half-hour increments because it scared the shit out of me, the first one. Because, Aliens, I was like, oh, great, yeah, boom, guns and explosions and all this stuff. But the first one was just like, oh my God. So, yeah.
Last season, we were talking about characters and sort of what makes a compelling character. And we had 5 different pieces to that puzzle. But that kind of definition was really just looking at what makes a compelling character. What I think we ought to talk about now that we're diving into our novels and starting to kind of scope these things out, is talk about how to execute that. We could use Alien as a jumping off. That's actually pretty interesting. Yeah. So there's a whole desire versus require, if you remember. And a lot of people call that, what's the character want versus what they need. But we had called it desire. What is it that the character desires and what is it that they really require? The desire is kind of that early goal in the story that they may actually achieve, but it doesn't give them satisfaction. And then they kind of spin into the real conflict from that inciting, event that kind of kicks it all off. So who's the main character in Aliens? Duh.
It would be Ripley. I would go with Ripley.
Exactly. So would I. So what is it that she desires at the beginning that doesn't actually come to fruition?
Desire at the beginning? Oh, she just wants to get back into normal life, but then discovers that it's like many, many years later. Because she's in cryogenic freeze, correct? Yeah, when she gets out of cryogenic freeze and they kind of tell her the story of how long she's been gone, like 50-something years. 57, I think. But she basically just wants to get back to her normal life. She wants to be left alone. She doesn't want to go anywhere. Like she just wants to drive her forklift, basically, and just leave her alone. And it turns out that, the inciting event of LV-426, they put a shake and bake colony on it. They've lost contact with the colony. These creatures. If anything's out there, we'd really like you to be there. And she's like, no way. Fuck you. I'm not going back. Because she's traumatized, as she should be. But yeah, she does end up changing her mind. I can't remember what it is that actually pushes her to make the change, though. Do you? I remember she goes, Burke stops by, an amazing performance by Paul Reiser. Burke stops by and talks to her don't they say that they have a colony out there, but then he tells her that they've lost contact?
Oh, I think he lied to her. I think he said that.
I think so. Yeah.
That it was some sort of lie. I don't remember. I'd have to go back and watch it again.
It's so funny that it's like, oh my God, I've seen that movie 6 million times, but all I remember are the one-liners and, and Hicks and all of the,
the worst. Yeah. That's kind of a throwaway scene. It's one of those connecting scenes, like a bridge from the cool thing to the next cool thing. So I don't really care about the bridge. I just want to get to the next cool thing. But I can see how, she wants to exorcise these demons. She wants to put this away permanently and be done with it. And hiding from it isn't going to make a difference. She also probably feels partially guilty about people being there in the first place. So, and if you remember in Alien, there was a whole undercurrent of the company being evil, right? The company being just out for profit. Which I guess comes out through the Ash character, the robot that they didn't know was a robot. And so you have that whole subplot, right? Where you've got the, Bishop the robot. And they subvert that expectation where in the first movie it had been the robot was, somewhat evil or just cold. And this one is actually good and does something to save the characters. So that was a nice subversion as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really, really good. Yeah. And I think it really shows, Ripley is the first one who's
in Aliens, she's ready to nuke the whole place once everything goes wrong. So she's ready. I think there's also a part of her that wants to just eradicate this issue because it had taken, it took her crew from her in the first movie. Think that's correct? Am I right?
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah, that's very insightful. She says we should eat the Scythe. It's the only way to be sure. And everybody's on board with that except for the company guy who's trying to bring it back. I think that must have been the lie that he told her, is that if they go out there, they're just going to exterminate it. They're not going to try to bring it back. I'm pretty sure
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Burke is such a wonderful character as well within that film, because he's you're like, all right, he's the corporate shill, but he seems to be okay. And then you're sort of like, oh, no, okay. Yeah, he is a jerk. Yeah, what a wonderful performance.
Yeah, and the casting there is perfect. Paul Reiser was a notable stand-up comedian. So it's already, casting against type, where it's this really evil corporate guy who's going to do what he wants to do, but you cast a clown, essentially, in that role, and so we soften to him pretty quickly because he's charming and he's a little funny, and so you don't see him as that kind of threat because of the casting. I guess if you're talking about, let's say, the novelization of Aliens, if we tried to sort of execute that, you would build in those kinds of specific details for that supporting character, which would make him friendly, affable, even charming or engaging, only to kind of undercut that later. But, it's funny, a lot of folks who are listening to the show are going to be talking or thinking through how to sort of evoke these things in their writing. And unfortunately, we're using film and TV more than we're using, But I think, using film and TV as these examples is a good thing, because the specific detail that kind of makes those performances so nuanced and so interesting, that's the kind of detail that you have to build into your characters when you present them. So, like, if you're already imagining the movie and sort of what would this person gesture or say or intonate or glance, or like, what are the things that are going to kind of tip the reader off, the same way that a moviegoer or a person watching TV would be tipped off by the performance. Those are good things to think about.
Yeah, that's always something that I like to think about if I'm writing a longer piece that's a longer narrative piece, fiction, or mostly, some sort of speculative science fiction-y thing. If I get sort of stuck, I try to take a step back, and instead of thinking about the words on the page, just trying to visualize what would it be like in the film version of this. Like, what am I looking at? What does the scene have? What are the other details that are happening that are showing that this person, is doing what I want them to do? And it's very helpful. It's really weird. We're talking about, writing a novel, and we've been talking about TV and movie, but I think for me, those visuals really, really help me just as much as reading books and reading novels and reading short stories, because it adds that visual element where you're like, oh, you know what? That's a great look that tells me something about that character. How can I get words into that? How can I do that in a way that really helps support my story? And not, sometimes I've tried to do that and I'm like, how can I write that in a way that's really going to make it buzz? And it's like, that doesn't serve the story. It's like, how can I get to that? How can I attain that? So it's very helpful, whether it's words or whether it's visuals. I really like doing that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's funny, though, if you look back maybe 100, 130 years at books, they wouldn't have had film as a reference. So those books feel different. If you read Henry James, for example, it's going to feel different from Kerouac, feel different from Margaret Atwood, or feel different from anyone writing today in the here and now, where we have so much more media that is informing the way that we visualize our world. Even phrases like cut to the chase, are referencing things from movies back in the 1920s. There's so much of our language that has sort of been created by the media that we consume, whether it's social media or the Hollywood type movies or streaming TV or whatever. So that might be one of the reasons why it's so hard for me to read really old books, because the way that the amount of time that they're taking to get to their point, I think is a luxury that we really don't have anymore.
Yeah.
Today's writers, you don't have to race to it, but you do need to get to the interesting parts more quickly. Whereas before, I think you had an expectation that a reader would kind of travel with you for a while. And if you're and on your left, you'll see Kilimanjaro. And, it's just not a thing anymore. So, like, one of the things that I was thinking about with the desire versus require thing that we had talked about earlier. And this is something that I'm going to try to remind myself, is that I don't want to wait to introduce the require, right? It's you get the desire really quickly, right? Because that's that kind of first step that the character takes that ends up not working out. All of that's going to kind of be presented and resolved within Act 1. So that's easy, right? You're going to do that. But the require really ought to be set up at that point too. And I think really, ideally, if I could just wave a wand, I would have them both set up at the same time. So we look at Aliens, and that might be a really good example, because what Ripley wants at that beginning is to be left alone, because that's the only way that she can conceive of sort of removing herself from the danger. Towards the end of the movie, we recognize that her new plan to remove the danger is to slag the planet with nuclear weapons and literally destroy all of the aliens. And that, of course, is also very, very good.
Yes.
And they went on to make more movies, because it's a franchise, so they resurrected those things. But, in theory, within that movie, that self-contained action, it worked.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I'm thinking about, I've written my blurb and I'm thinking I've been starting to put words down on paper to try and find the shape of my own novel for our project. And the require, because I'm just sort of spitballing now, that's one of the things that I really have very vaguely thought of, is the desire versus require. And so that's something that I think I'm just kind of, it's crazy. I'm just sort of like, Art, I'm using your method and I'm going to tell you how I'm doing it. And, but it's,
I want to hear how you're doing it.
So I think what I'm doing right now, which is something that I've never done, again, just as I've mentioned a couple times before, a lot of times when I've done these larger works, I've just gone headlong into it. I've just started writing. I sort of put the book down, put the work down when I'm like, oh, it would be funny or I think I know what would happen next. And then I would walk away from it so that I'd be excited to return to it. And this time I'm trying to do the opposite of that and have a little bit of planning and have a little bit of thought into it so that so that if I get to the spot where I'm editing, doing a second draft of the book, I already know who the character is, so that perhaps if I need to make major changes, they will be in line with who the character I've created is, not, well, let's be honest, not because I just needed to do 1,000 words that day and I was feeling behind. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that's why I'm really sort of trying to use the time, previously, if I'm being honest, and I'm sort of now just maybe coming to this realization, I think I thought I was wasting time planning instead of working, and not understanding that planning is part of the working. And I thought that I would get too bogged down in, well, what will happen then in the third act? Well, let me think about that for a couple weeks. I've always been reticent to try that plotting because I was always like, well, that's not as valid as getting words on paper. And so I want to throw that bullshit notion out of my head and see what I could do if I tried to put on, a different hat and did that planning. And so I think that working on that require versus desire is definitely something that I've been thinking about a lot. Yeah. And it's led to a lot of fun moments in my sort of plotting. I'm just sort of, writing ideas down as they come without any real form. And it's been really fun.
Yeah. I we talked about this recently, because we do talk when we don't record each other. So we do have conversations that we don't record.
Yes, I swear they're not better than these conversations. Not at all. For those of you who don't know, Art swears like a sailor when he's not on the show.
That is true. Because it's emphasis. But, no, we talked about, this concept that I had. And look, this is not new, but it's new to me. And I've framed it in my mind as draft zero, right? So in the past, my problem was, I had many, but the one that I'm talking about right now is that I would start to write and I would feel compelled to sort of go back to the beginning and edit to try to clean it up. And I was trying to make essentially the final version the first time, which is unsustainable, especially in a longer piece. I guess if you're writing flash fiction, maybe. If you're writing a normal short story, you're really setting yourself up for a problem. But here, I need to know who the characters are and sort of what they're up against. And I didn't feel comfortable doing just an outline. So I don't know if there's anybody out there who hates outlining. I like having an outline, but if the outline is too detailed, then I feel like all of the discovery is done. And that's not fun for me. The fun part about writing is the act of discovery and sort of crafting an elegant phrase or creating something interesting that's new to me. So Draft Zero is my compromise approach to doing this. So what I do is I've got my Tandy 1000 TL, right? So I load up the dinosaur computer and just pull up a document and I just start trying to tell the story without any preconception that the language that goes into the Tandy is something that I will keep. It's basically a treatment for a screenplay. It's pretty similar, where you would kind of read it from start to finish and it would give you the overarching plot, the main characters, the conflicts that are in play, etc. And this kind of looseness of form and the lack of focus on the quality of the prose is very freeing to me, because now I can just try to tell a decent story. Because if I'm sitting across a bar from a friend of mine and go, oh man, you're never going to believe this, that story needs to be compelling. That story needs to have some ups and downs, some tension, some interesting people doing wacky things. Like, that's just a story. And I remember the feedback that I had gotten from a professor of mine back at Texas State, just tell me a story. And it was the best and worst advice I had ever gotten back then. And I really wish that I could go back in time and tell my earlier self what he means is Draft Zero. What he means is you need to be able to just, lay the narrative out so that you have interesting stuff happening to cool people. Then you can go back and start to kind of craft it and make it this literary thing that you want it to be. But I was starting with the sort of literary sensibility and without an understanding of who the people were or what they were up against, and that's part of that whole desire require thing. You got to give them something that they want to attain that's actually difficult to attain. I used to write away from stress. I'd want to put my characters under stress. And so you had these people who weren't super interesting to begin with, and they weren't being put under pressure. And so those narratives weren't very interesting. So as a result, I would try to use expertly crafted language to kind of prop the story up. But for the most part, if I had just focused on who are the people, what are they trying to do, what are the obstacles that are being put in their way, and how much stress can I put them under to kind of reveal who they are, that's where you should start. And so for me, that's what Draft Zero is. It's just this kind of wide open treatment that I'm going to write from start to finish, print it out. Yeah, it's actually going to make it onto paper. And then I'm going to start scribbling on it. And I might even use a trick that you had used, Tim, which is transfer some of that stuff to note cards so I can kind of rearrange pieces of it. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, and it's funny while you were mentioning that, one of the things that I loved from Kurt Vonnegut was him telling you to treat, I'm obviously paraphrasing, but treat your main character like shit, like have horrible things happen because the audience wants to see what they're made of. And so while maybe that's too harsh a word to say, like treat them like shit, but have these things happen, that's what we're kind of wanting to see. We want to see this regular person who seems to be the regularest person on this crew named Ripley deal with this insane situation where there's like this stowaway alien that's killing and eating everyone else that's on board. And that's what's really fun to me about it, is that kind of like, let's throw these roadblocks in. And I don't, to be honest, I don't think I've really done that. As we've said a couple times, I've written 4 longer pieces that are around 50,000 words. I don't know if I did that because I avoided conflict, because that meant I had to get them out of the conflict. And I've always been like, I don't know if I'm smart enough to get people out of the conflict I throw at them, Yeah. And I've had a lot of avoidance. So one of the things that sort of happened to me that I didn't realize that I was going to do in developing some characters, I've also I have a couple characters that I've been writing short stories about. Some of them have been accepted. Some of them are out there for, review. And some of them are, as I say, from my old NASCAR fan days, behind the wall and in the garage getting worked on. And so, I've got a piece that's coming out, a longer, like 5,000 word sci-fi piece coming out a little bit later this year about a character that I've already had another short story published for. And so it's kind of interesting because sometimes we've also talked about having characters and maybe, that sort of idea of, well, what did your character have for breakfast, or how does your character walk into a room, or anything like that we've talked about. I've sort of kind of done that kind of stuff, and I'm wondering if I should do the same with this main character that I have, just for, the proverbial S's and G's, write some smaller pieces about the character. Maybe not even for with the intent of publishing, but just to kind of get a feel for who the character is.
I mean, that's a good idea. If you've got the time and the desire and you want to kind of tell some backstory pieces that might influence what's happening in the main narrative, there's no stopping you there. I think the trick is just kind of getting at that second piece, which is something essential is threatened. What is it that they want or that they need, that they're scared of losing, right? What do they think they can't live without?
Yeah.
What's taken away their power? What's taken away their security, their agency, stuff like that. And that's, I'm interested in seeing that the guy that I'm writing about is kind of a middle manager at a factory. And, it's very easy to sort of conceive of that person as not having any real problems, but everybody's got problems, right? Everybody's got something. So it's just about tuning into what is that person, what's most important to them, and how can I put it at risk? And it might not even be at risk. It might be, you've seen stories about, overprotective or controlling boyfriends who think that their girlfriend is cheating on them, right? Or flip the genders. The gender's irrelevant. So one partner thinks the other partner's cheating on them. And so they start to tail them, get a private investigator, this, that, the other, right? They do all this stuff because they think that relationship is at risk. And then it turns out that they didn't have any reason to suspect this person of doing anything bad. But the act of doing that sort of snooping and spying erodes the quality of the relationship to the point where often those end because those are red flags for the other partner to get out while they still can. So that's something essential is threatened when it actually isn't threatened, but the threat is in the main character's head. So that's really what I'm getting at. It's for me, I need to figure out how to not choose something that's trivial or replaceable or tangential. It's gotta be really the most important thing to that character that's being threatened. The easy button is if a character's life is threatened, right? So that's why you see so many stories about, oh my God, he's going to die if he doesn't do X. Because that's kind of an easy button to just say, well, they'll die. But it's more interesting sometimes when it's a facet of a person's personality, or if it's a particular relationship, that's threatened. So that's what I'm trying to focus on in Draft Zero, is how do I arrive at what that essential thing is. And then it becomes pretty easy, right? Because now that I know what the jewel is that they're trying to protect, well, how do I attack the jewel? And then, if I can put myself in the headspace of the person who thinks that the jewel is so important, all right, well, let's pretend that's me. What would I do to make damn sure that doesn't happen? And now you've got pretty ready-made conflict, pretty ready-made action. Yeah.
And it's for myself in figuring out, what essentially is threatened. A lot of what I've been writing, I have sort of come into this newfound age in my, the last 8-ish to 10 years, realizing that there are tons of gold mines out there to look at as far as inspiration for writing. But, I started to take accountability for what I don't like about myself. And that's where I'd say a zillion percent of my zillion percent. Let's take it easy. How about just 100%? 100% of what I'm writing about now is me. And so that's something that I really want to explore in this novel, and what I had been kind of exploring in the pieces that I had written before, to be able to say, can I do this? Can I write a longer piece? I'm definitely writing to try and figure out some of the stuff. So that's what is kind of exciting to me as well, is in my personal life, I had been repeating the same things in my 30s, and then I got to my 40s and was sort of like, you know what? Maybe I need to take some of these thoughts that I have and how I deal with people and how I handle relationships, and instead of letting them fly by, like yank them straight out of the air, get them down on paper and work them out. And I think that's why, for me, not only finding out what my character in this novel that you and I are respectively working on, the character is sort of, I want it to be fun. I want it to be engaging. I want it to, have, obviously there's going to be, it won't be 100% me, but boy, it is a lot of fun to like tap yourself for the information that you get and go, oh, hey, wait a minute. Because I think one of the things that I found when I used to teach improv is, there was this article, and I really wish I could find it, but someone was like, why is it that we get so insanely invested in reality shows? And because we would say, why is that person making that choice that is driving everyone on social media crazy? Someone, I don't know, I can think of reality shows. There are a lot of dating ones. Like, why are they picking that person? Why are they saying this thing to this person? And what it shows is that while we are all like going, that's insane, everyone has a different take on things. And so I think for a long time, I just sort of felt like, well, I'm not very important. And let me be clear, I'm not, because there are a lot of people out there. And I'm not trying to put a different valuation on my existence than others, but I do tend to think that my own personal emotional and mental conflagrationary is at least interesting for me to investigate, and doing that through writing has been very helpful.
Yeah, look, if you're looking for flaws to give to your characters, just check the mirror, right? Like that's, it's right there. There's plenty of them, but what it requires of the writer is really a clarity of thought and an openness to critically look at how you, because there are plenty of people who just aren't, they either purposely aren't, or they haven't been trained to think critically, or it's too painful and they don't want to think about what's wrong with them. They just kind of want to project it out into the world. But I mean, you and I are of that opinion that you can just check the mirror and go, oh yeah, I could write about this garbage and this crap. But it's there.
And to be honest with you, I just remembered this a long time ago. I mean, this is like 15, 20, I don't even remember. I had written a couple pieces, or maybe it was a piece, and I remembered you reading it and being like, I think you're still a little too close to this. There isn't a step away from to take an objective look at the piece. And I think that that's very, very important advice that I got from you so long ago, which was, yes, you have to look in the mirror, but you also have to, just as you just said right now, you have to be able to look at it critically. Let's take something that, for example, I was definitely in my 20s real stupid and sort of like, I can't believe that I got dumped by this person. She was a jerk. She was, she did this and she did that and she said this and she said that. And so it's very, very easy to be in that moment of anger towards someone else instead of saying, well, maybe you had some responsibility, if not all, in why that relationship failed. And so, I think looking in the mirror is good, like you just said, but you also have to have that clarity, which you just said also, but also, I'm just remembering this now, said to me like 15 or 20 years ago.
That's awesome. Well, at least I'm consistent, right? It's funny that you mentioned the relationship thing. I actually wrote a letter. It was right after I got out of graduate school. I had this very uncomfortable interaction or set of interactions with a girl that I was really hoping that I could develop a relationship with. And I was just a knucklehead, and she was already like tied up with somebody else, so it was never going to be a thing. But I was very sullen. I was like an open wound about it, and it made everybody around me uncomfortable. So shortly after that, maybe a year or two after, thinking about it, I wrote this scathing sort of, finger pointing, letter to her with the intention to never send it, and I never did. So then, I met my wife, I got married, and I stumbled upon that letter maybe 5 or 7 years later. And I read it, and it was cringeworthy. And I remember sitting there going, oh, Jesus, dude, you were like 100% wrong. Like the entire letter is bullshit. So I wrote a second letter to myself, the writer of the first letter, explaining why I was full of shit and completely in the wrong. And those 2 letters sit right next to each other in my hard drive.
Yeah.
And it's like, so, man, come on. So yeah, flaws plenty.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things is it's just a very simple statement where it came from Beastie Boys, who have had a history, their own history that they've tried to own up to. And I think it was Ad Rock that said it best. You got to own your shit. And that's one of my favorite things to do, is to own that S, but also use that because, I always used to say, boy, you know what? I can't wait. I'm going to make $1 million off all the books and stories I'm going to write about all these crazy ex-girlfriends I had. Yeah, there was a common denominator and all that, and it was me. So it's like, yeah. I am now the fountain of all the inspiration because I was such a moron.
Well, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. We're not saying like mine your past to sort of find all the things that are wrong with you,
right,
and then dump them on your head to make you feel bad about it. Like that's not the point. I can look back at who I was previously and recognize when I was making a mistake, but I thought it was the right thing to do. Like I never intentionally made an error. I always thought I was doing the right thing. I just had to mature and I had to learn. So that's the thing about characters, right? We'll pull this back to characters. The flaws and their imperfections make them compelling. So that's one of the things that we had talked about for characters. Flaws make people more human. Yeah. I used to write perfect characters because I didn't want them to get in trouble because it made me feel bad. And also because I didn't want to use myself as a template because I thought people would recognize themselves in the work and I thought that would be embarrassing. So my characters largely didn't do very much and they were mostly perfect. And it was super boring, right? And implausible. People aren't perfect. People's Instagram might be perfect, but that's not real life, So, the flaws make them more human, more relatable, right? More interesting. And they are ready-made sources of conflict. If I think that the right thing to do is to kick the door down and walk in bull in the china shop style and go, okay, people, we're doing it my way. It's new sheriff in town, that kind of thing. And then all the folks in that area, chafe against that. Well, that's going to make a pretty compelling scene. And I can take that flaw and apply it to that character and say, well, let's give them this. And that might be one of the things that they learn and change by the end of the story. Or it may not, but it still kind of gives you instant conflict. So lean into those flaws, I think is what I'm going to be trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, and yes, the same, you shouldn't try and make yourself feel bad. That hasn't worked for me for 5 years, in your old mistakes, but it's good. It just feels better for me to be able to look inward and say, hey, how about this moment? Or how about this? Or what was I doing here? And use that to sort of as a jumping off point. And it does set up, you've got a lot of conflict inside. Use it.
No, I agree. The next topic that we talked about was that the main character needed to be uniquely skilled. And so I think I had mentioned John McClane as a good example from Die Hard.
Yes.
Last time. And there's thousands of good examples. But once we recorded that episode, all of the media that I've consumed since then, that's one of the filters that I use. Like, well, wait a minute. What are the unique skills that this person brings to the table? And sure enough, every story I've watched, that person is like the perfect person to deal with whatever the problem is because they've got some kind of skill that addresses it. And so you as the writer have the option to imbue them with whatever they need, whether it's dormant and the actions of the story kind of bring it to the surface, or whether it's something that they already have and they need to choose to use it rather than not. Those are the two things that I've seen. But identify what kind of special skill or knowledge or, awareness or empathy or toughness or resilience, like whatever, right? But what makes them perfect for the task? and then how do you get it into the story? So
yeah.
I think one of the things I'm going to try to avoid is I don't want to make a set of skills that's so large that anybody could have it, right? Oh, he's really good at math. Like, I don't know if that's enough.
Yeah.
Like, imagine a beautiful mind, but it's not John Nash. It's just a guy who's really good with numbers. I don't know that that's going to work, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, the uniquely skilled, that's something that I'm also thinking about in this new work that I'm trying to work on. I know what I have like a nice vague idea of what I want this novel to be about. And I'm kind of wondering if the uniquely skilled part of it is going to play into it, or if it's something that the character, it's just something I need to think more about. I really want to write a fun sort of detective novel set in a mall. That's essentially what I want to write my novel as. But I want the person who wants to be the detective to be so misguided in that belief. And I think, maybe I should just give a little backstory. Since the turn of the century, I have been an actor, and I've had a very, I've been very, very lucky to be in what I've been in. But the dreams of being like the lead in a Star Trek, I had those kind of like, I was younger and had a lot of lofty ideas of like what I could become. And I am now very interested in that idea of like, wow, that is a very lofty goal to have, to be able to lead a 100% creative life, and one that is applauded. But what if somebody wanted to attain that life but did none of the work to get it? And I'm still fleshing a lot of this out. So yeah, the uniquely skilled in something is, I want my character to be uniquely skilled in detecting, but in the wrong aspects of it. Oh. So in other words, she wants to be unique. This character has read the Hardy Boys Detective Handbook, or has watched a lot of Murder, She Wrote, which have almost no practical use in the real world of being a detective.
Yeah, that'd be hilarious if it was a super huge Agatha Christie fan, and so they've been sort of practicing in the mirror to be really good at that whole Poirot, everybody's in the same room kind of thing.
Yeah.
And eliciting the confession, but that's not the way the world works. That's pretty funny. Is this the one that's kind of a film noir, science fiction?
I would like to, I'm going to try and take away the science fiction part of it, I think. I just want to base it, because I use science fiction a lot as an excuse to not, sometimes I use it too much. I rely on it too much instead of trying to be more honest. And so I'd really like this to be just a sort of normal kind of fun set in a mall, and maybe the names will be ridiculous because I don't want it to be. A long time ago, I had a friend at the University of New Orleans who hated covers of books that had like someone's rendition of the main character painted or photographed on the front, or even worse, if it was a book about a movie that had like the actors. He's like, I don't want to have this preconceived notion of who these people are given to me before I read the book.
That's fair.
And so a lot of the things that I've been doing, I do like science fiction because I can make up names, so I can sort of try and degender or make it so that these people are just, you get to create whoever this person is. Hopefully I've given you enough information to know what they're like, but you can picture whoever you want to be in these positions. So that's one of the things I'm going to do.
I think you might, you might be in the right space then to remove the sci-fi element from it, because it's just one more layer of conceit that you have to get the reader to buy in on. And if the main goal or the main thrust of the narrative hinges more on the film noir aspect than it does the speculative element, then I think
for example, one of my absolute favorite film of this century, and it probably might go pretty deep for my entire life. Like, I love Brick, which is a film by Rian Johnson.
Yeah, and you told me about that. I still haven't seen it. I'm sorry.
No, it's no big thing. It's just what has happened is that he is obviously such a very big fan of old film noir and of Twin Peaks, which is my absolute favorite IP in the world. Like, it is it's just it looks like a fan letter to these old films, and it's beautifully done, and it's a great movie. And so that's kind of something that I like to do, because I've started to sort of enjoy noir films, watching them on Criterion, and then that's sort of, and for me, and I want to make sense of what I said earlier, wanting to be an actor and thinking when I was younger, oh, whenever I want to take it seriously, I'll just take it seriously, and then I'll be an actor for the rest of my life and live comfortably in that career. No, honey, it doesn't happen like that, you know? And so I would love to explore that part of myself through someone who might have grown up wanting to be a detective and loves the glitz and the glamour and the idea of being a detective and living like Columbo and having, these like cases where they're easy and they get figured out and everything's all fine. But that's not how it really is. And so that's kind of what I'd really like to explore.
That's very cool. I would like to read that. Just off the top of my head, it feels like if there's obviously like 10 ways you could go with that. If I were to write that, it might be going towards the person who wants to be in control of a situation, right? Being a detective and sort of sussing out who the murderer is or who the thief was, puts you as the smartest person in the room. And so if you're going to have kind of a juxtaposition of who they want to be versus who they are, then naturally who they are has to be pretty far away from who they want to be. Yeah. So that's the exploration. It'd be really interesting to see where you place them in relation to where they want to be. And that would be the whole desire require thing and getting it out up front as quickly as possible to show us who they want to be and who they actually are. And then the book is either the journey towards who they want to be or the journey into who they should become relative to what they want. Yeah. Very cool.
I'm going to actually take a step away for one moment, because I've just realized you've given me a very good idea for said novel that I want to.
Go ahead.
So thank you. We're working out my novel in real time here.
I love it.
As I'm going to the notes to just write. Okay, perfect. All right, done. Great. Okay. We'll see if that 2 lines of notes that I've just written to myself makes it through to the end of the season, and when we should have our novels.
I know. I'm starting to feel the mild panic, but my draft 0 is progressing, so I'm feeling good about it. But anyway, just to wrap up the whole uniquely skilled thing, because I'm still struggling with how is my guy uniquely skilled. One of the things he seems to do really well is navigate bureaucracy. Again, I'm just looking in the mirror and trying to say, what are the things that I do well or do poorly, and how can I use those in the characters? And I do navigate bureaucracy pretty well. And he sort of set his sight on a short-term goal, which is the desire, and it's not going to work out for him, but he's going to be applying all of these skills to try to acquire, will try to get his desire, right? And so you'll get to see what he's good at pretty early, because he's going to put a full court press on this thing that ultimately isn't going to work out. And then I'm hoping that as the narrative progresses, those skills that were sort of shown in Act 1, it's kind of like, what is it, check off? If you show the gun in Act 1, it's got to go off in Act 3. Yeah, I'm hoping it'll be that kind of thing. But yeah, probably the biggest thing that I'm going to try to avoid is I don't want to wait to introduce the specialness of the main characters. And that includes the villain as well. So my antagonist, I need to make sure that his specialness is front and center, so that we kind of know what we're dealing with. Because I think the longer you wait, the more it feels like a Deus Ex Machina, where it's like, I forgot to tell you he was a computer genius. Like, wait, what?
Are you tell me about the thought process between the antagonist and the protagonist? Because sometimes, villains can be a lot of fun to write.
Oh God, I don't want to give away too much, but I'm in love with these 2 characters. I'm excited about the potential that they offer. Mine is a science fiction story, which is new for me. All of my short fiction has been very much either irrealist stuff in the style of Bartholomew Coover, Gass, those guys, or it's been straight down the middle of the fairway realistic fiction. So I haven't really done any sci-fi, but I love to consume that media. And so I'm like, well, why can't I? So I'm going to give it a shot. And the antagonist is actually a survivor of a massacre in a prison. And he was able to escape as a young man, I think 15, 16 is what I have him right now. So we'll see if that holds. But as a young man, he sort of got out of this prison massacre, having really seen it full force, and he was just missed. He was one of the people who was missed. And so he escapes basically into the wild on this particular planet that's being terraformed, and it's basically almost done, but there's this large industrial component to the planet, and the protagonist is a guy who works for the company that is actually doing the terraforming. So they're going to have this natural sort of contention, because the antagonist's whole point of view is to survive, and he has cultivated this survival instinct around preemptive first strike. So if he just recognized, hey, I can go off into the wilderness, I can kind of go carve out my own little space in the world, and nobody's going to mess with me. If he knew that 100%, he wouldn't be the antagonist. He would just be a dude out in the wilderness. But because he assumes that at every point in his life, people have tried to take things away from him, people have tried to kill him, that if he does not strike first, he will lose everything. So that's just the way he does it. He strikes first. And so I see, because a lot of the good, or some of the best villains are people who have a little bit of empathy to their backstory. Like, you can kind of see why they're doing it. It's still bad what they're doing, but you understand where it came from. It's not just like, oh, I'm evil and wah-ha-ha-ha, I will monologue now. It's like, no. Like, you really have to understand why people choose to do what they're doing. And so my antagonist is somebody who really does things out of a self-preservation and a survival instinct, but he takes it on the attack. And that's how, if I can kick you first, then you can't kick me. So that's what's going to happen. I'm really excited to see how that plays out, because the protagonist is not a fighter at all. Like, he doesn't want to initiate conflict. When he's attacked, he's probably just going to go find a place where he can be safe. So safety is at the kind of core of this, but these two people approach it very, very differently. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope it works out. But that all gets into like the whole idea of action, right? So acting, and by acting, they change. So what I'm assuming is that the villain, the antagonist, will actually see the benefit of not preemptively first striking at every possible moment. Like, maybe he'll come around to this notion of, I don't have to attack everyone all the time. But it'll probably be too late in the story by the time he realizes that, and he will have sort of, incited the wrath of all the people who are very, very committed to getting him out of the way. Whereas the other guy, who's very much a pacifist and really trying to use bureaucracy to sort of carve out a space for him to be safe, is going to see the value in being more demonstrative and being more aggressive, the right kind of aggressive. So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. That's the overall thematic kind of movement.
All right. And so the action of this piece is, that's the whole thing. That's what I'm nervous about. I'm nervous about the action.
Well, the trick about action, I mean, and the fact that you sort of stalled out, I'm there too, dude.
Exactly. That's it. It's like, a great idea I have on paper. I just don't know how to execute
That's
it.
Right. There should be action. You're right, Tim. There should be action. Yes. I agree. Yes, there will be action. Can't wait. So
now you talk about action. Let me hear your
That's
thoughts.
Right. No. I don't want to get in your way, Tim. But like, I made a few notes just as I was thinking about it. It's all going to stem from their desires, right? So what's the thing that I want? Let's say that I'm the main character in the story. What's the thing that I want? And now all I have to do as the writer is ask that character, all right, well, you want to build a swimming pool in your backyard. What are you going to do about it? Oh, well, I might go try to get a loan. Oh, I might, pair up with a mobster. I might ask my parents for money. Like, there's 100 ways that you could try to acquire the funding to put the pool in. So it's like, how do you chase your desire, right? It could also be if something is scaring you, right? And you have to face your fear. That could be a form of action. Like, what is it? Indiana Jones, I think. And he falls into the pit and it's all snakes. And it's already been set up. Like, snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? That's really interesting, action. Or if you've got somebody who stands up to authority or, stuff like that. But basically, what I am trying to remember is that action in this sense is not just activity. It's not car chases or, swordplay or any of that stuff, right? So that's just like that's moving pawns on the chessboard. And maybe as a final conflict, if you're kind of setting up this major engagement or battle, well then yeah, you need to give people a taste of that. But just sort of, oh, not much is happening, let's throw a car chase in. Like you've seen movies do that too, where it's just random car chase and you're like, why are you doing this? This doesn't advance the story. It doesn't help me understand more about the characters. What the hell are we doing here? So I'm trying to stay away from stuff like that.
Yeah. And I'm sort of like interested for, I think one of the great movies that I always go back to, again, because I'm such a horrible reader and can't recall the zillion novels that I've read, but we have Star Trek II. Kirk, they're getting older. Kirk's trying to, it's like almost like Kirk's, he's got another birthday and he's got to go back into this, now he's going to be, put out to pasture in some sort of administrative, he's going to become an admiral or something like that. And then, and then this thing happens where he meets this old, adversary, and it makes him sort of feel young again because he's made into a captain and he has to solve this whole issue. And that's kind of the thing that I really would like to explore with this novel, is that sort of, existential crisis of getting older. And maybe for my character who almost gave up on, being a detective, maybe this is it. Yeah. And that's what impels her into action. Maybe this is the last time I have to see if this dream is something that I can live out. And so I sometimes tend to be a little too, ethereal and don't connect the dots very well. So that's going to be a pretty good challenge for me, is to sort of try and see if I can, if I can make that work, or if I start writing and something else happens. But for right now, that's kind of the action that I think that's going to impel her into action, is this idea of, this might be the last chance I get to do this.
See, and that's something essential is threatened. You're describing a character who has always pressed pause on their desire because they thought they had more time. I'll do it later, do it later, do it later, do it later.
Oh, yeah.
And now that time has run out. So that really makes the essential thing of, I'm going to be a detective. It's threatened by time. Like, this is your last shot. You see that in sports movies, too, where it's, I remember one, I don't remember what it was called, but it was some stupid movie from the 80s.
Major League?
No, but although that's the first one that popped in my head, but no, I was thinking of it was a made-for-TV movie with Robert something or other. But he was a quarterback, and he was like a middle-aged man. Well, he was in his 30s. I think he was like 34, 35 or whatever. And he had played in high school, but never got a shot in college. And he goes back to college and has NCAA eligibility, so he becomes the starting quarterback for the team. And it's this like last shot at, being the star quarterback or something. And I remember really enjoying it, but I was like 10, but I really enjoyed it. I'm sure it's a lousy movie. But,
was it Robert Conrad in the movie Glory Days?
There it is.
There you go.
There it is.
There you go.
So I just remember really enjoying it, but it's the same kind of thing. If you just look at the setup of Something Essential is Threatened, here he had this dream as a child that he couldn't realize, and now somehow he has this opportunity to try to relive it. He's got one last shot, so he's going to take it, and there's a lot of one last shot kind of sports movies love that trope, one last shot.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it bad, right? Like if it's been done before, it's okay as long as you do it in a way that's fresh. It's fine. So, yeah, I mean, that's not a part of my narrative, the whole one last shot. I don't think. But the first chapter of the book I'm working on starts with my main character having a video conference with a girl that it's his girlfriend. He's trying to convince her to come live on the planet with him. And it has the potential to be a really interesting scene. I'm very excited about it because the technology that's being used, they're pretty far apart in distance, and there's a lag. There's like a 72-second lag in their conversation. And so they start the conversation with just text messages because those have a much shorter lag, and they're not getting anywhere. And he's like, we need to talk, face to face. And so they switch to this video thing. And because of the lag, when he's sort of spilling his guts, she's just sitting there and he has to wait the 72 seconds. And then other stuff is happening around him that he has to get up and go attend to because he's having the conversation at work. And so while he's attending to the other things, she's responding to what he had said. So he's like, and he like hustles back. So it has a little bit of a comedic factor to it, but what they're talking about is very serious. And I'm really interested to write that sequence because I think it's going to be pretty revealing. But anyway, getting back to the whole idea that characters act, and by doing the action they change. That's why action isn't people running around, or stuff blowing up behind them or car chases. Action is characters making choices and then experiencing the consequences of those choices. And very often the consequences of the choices is the thing that's going to encourage them to change or not, and that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah. The change, that's something that I also am afraid to start looking at, because that means there's going to be an end to the story, which means I need to figure that out. Oh, I can start you 1,000 books. Oh, I can start 1,000 short stories. It's just wrapping it up is going to be is always the part that I'm the most anxious about.
Yeah, I have a different way of thinking about that now. So I'm not going to suggest this to you, but I will describe to you the way that I'm thinking about it now, which is different from the way I used to think about it. I used to say the same thing. I have to figure out how it ends. And now, because I'm doing draft 0, what I am leaning on instead is I'm eager to discover what my character does to try to get out of the problem that I put them in. And I know that might just be semantics, but it really takes the pressure off of me having to sort of design the puzzle, design the maze that the rat runs through. That's a different experience than just, being at eye level with the rat and just kind of running through the maze and going, oh my God, there's a wall. Where do we go? And I trust the character. Like if I've done a good job of making them special enough that they're a key that fits in a certain lock, and that I have a really strong understanding of what is important to them, what's essential that's being threatened, and that I can imagine, what lengths they would go to prevent that thing from being threatened anymore, then I feel pretty confident that they'll be able to figure a way out of the story. So I don't want it to be me. I want it to be them.
That's actually a very good idea, and I might steal that.
Please do.
Yeah.
I don't know if it works.
Yeah, I know. That's what we'll find out.
Yeah, but that's what I'm going to try.
Here on season 5 of the Tiffin Writing Workshop, where we still try to finish our novels.
That's right. My new theory is,
and here's what. Okay, so I'm going to take a dartboard, right? No. And that's actually a really good idea, and that's why I think for me, instead of just rushing headlong into the writing, I would like to know a little bit more about the character. I don't want the thinking about the character to hinder my forward progress in writing, because that's where I'll also find out a ton about the characters that I'm writing about. But, I want to have a little bit more of an idea of who the person is, and so that the character choices will be in line with who, with who I want it to, who I want it to be? No, who the character is. That's a better way to say it.
Yeah, they do kind of reveal themselves to us. It's almost like they're real people, and we're getting a glimpse behind the curtain of who they are, rather than me, and that, again, is designed to take the pressure off of me. I can't create a fully formed human being from scratch. That's not realistic, but I can absolutely take aspects of people that I know, and put it under stress and see what kind of person emerges from that, crucible. You know what it's also going to do? I think the reason I'm thinking about it this way, and I'm excited to try it this way, is that I don't think I'm going to risk that old problem of having an ending that you have to write towards. And I've seen this a lot, especially in emerging writers, that they feel that they have to go towards the ending they initially came up with, even if the story is kind of bending in a different direction. And you can tell when they take a hard left, and they're pulling the story back to where, no, you're supposed to go over here.
Right.
And that's super unsatisfying. Even if the ending is cool, it's unearned. And I want to avoid knowing how it's going to end and then forcing the characters to kind of race towards the ending that I came up with.
Yeah. And that is something that I've had a problem with before too. Like where suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, I've just discovered this is the great closing line of this piece. I now have to fit everything to make this closing line work. And I'm getting better at it. I'm getting better at being able to be like, you know what? Cut that. It's got to go. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm getting better at, what is it? You got to kill your children. What's the thing?
That's very kill your darlings. Yeah.
Kill your darlings. Mm-hmm. That's it. It's better than us saying kill your children on there.
Yeah, let's avoid that.
let's avoid that. But yeah, so killing my darlings has been something. And so now I'm comforted in that, because if I do kill the darlings, I just take those darlings and put them in a notes file of like the one-liners that need to exist somewhere else.
That's what Jeff was saying. If you remember, Jeff Oakes was very clear that he doesn't throw anything away because that line could be used somewhere else. And you've told the story several times about U2, how they'll repurpose, portions of other songs and make whole new songs out of them. Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to say about change, if, and this is for the folks out there who are listening, if you've got a main character who doesn't really change throughout your story, what you may want to consider there is that maybe you didn't put enough stress on them. And that's one thing that I'm keeping in my back pocket, because I want to be able to look at who that person was at the beginning of the story, who they are in the end. And for me, I want to see a change. I know that some character arcs are flat, but I think those are mostly supporting roles. I can't think of a main character who has a flat arc, and one that's satisfying. But certainly, side characters, can be the same. But I'm talking about main characters. I want to see a change in mine, so that I'm keeping that in my back pocket.
Yeah. And I do want to make something that has a nice marked change. I remember when I was younger, being like, no, I think I want to experiment with ideas. I want to experiment with someone that doesn't change in the story because I'm so great. No, that doesn't work. I think simplifying and having something that is a very satisfying change is a very big goal of mine.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't put it past you to be able to do that at some point in your career. But as I understand it, Picasso didn't start out doing cubist art. Like, he was doing...
Right.
he was doing normal stuff, and then eventually he's like, this is boring, I'm going to do something cool. And he did something new. So, for me, I just want to start with the meat and potatoes. I want to start with the things that are, doable, and see if I can do those well. And I think you can earn the right, not you, I mean me, I can earn the right to break the rules once I've been able to replicate those and use them properly. So that's where I'm going to start.
Yeah, I'm excited to start too. And now I think I might be spending a good portion of the day I'll take the dog out for a walk and start thinking about some more character stuff.